Thanks, Coach Brown, for joining us on 24/7 Sports Social Distancing. North Carolina head football coach going into his second season of his second tenure in Chapel Hill. You guys signed the nation's number 19 recruiting class last cycle. And right now you're sitting at number 2 in our rankings this cycle, certainly tracking for the program's top-rated recruiting class in history. When you were at Texas, I remember when I first started covering recruiting, it seemed like you'd have one junior day with many of the state's best prospects, and over half of your class would commit that day. It was more like drafting. Talk about the change in dynamics in recruiting now and why you've been so successful this time in North Carolina.
Well, Steve, first, thanks for having me on. You guys do a tremendous job, and I'm very honored. When I was here before, Steve, John Cooper at Ohio State and Joe Paterno at Penn State started having huge camps in the summer from out-of-state kids, and they would commit them all, and then they would go back and recruit the in-state kids. And nobody else was doing that. So we started doing that here. And we started trying to get kids in the spring that we felt like we really wanted, and then go back and look at some others. So we got to Texas. They didn't even have camps until maybe the year before we got there. And they weren't early recruiting, so we started it, and it worked really, really well for us. The good and the bad is that when you got 27 million people, you're trying to find all the players, trying to find them early, and obviously you miss some. Or you may get some early and they don't play as well later. So that's the negative. The positive is that you can get ahead of the next class and the next class. And one thing that's really helped us this year is after we signed the great class last year for us, we were able to get way ahead and see these 21s last fall, and a lot of them came to our game. They came to basketball games. So even with the coronavirus period here where we're not able to get off campus, we were able to get way ahead.
Seeing the way Clemson built their program up under Coach Dabo Swinney, a combination of culture and player development for sure. But then recruiting at first for them was a mix of, and maybe even still, them landing high-profile guys, some, but then also landing guys that were evaluation wins for them that were maybe less touted, but guys that were high on their own board, that fit their culture, fit them schematically, and they coached them up. Do you see some similarities with what y'all are doing in the trajectory of your program to Dabo Swinney and Clemson early on there?
I do, Steve. I remember Dabo was kind of raised by Coach Stallings and Coach Bryant, and played for those guys around them a lot. And Woody McCorby's a dear friend of mine that's in charge of their football operations, and he was Coach Stallings' assistant head coach, associate head coach when they were at Alabama. And I remember Coach Bryant telling me, get you some great ones, but get you a whole lot of really good ones around those great ones, or it doesn't work. You can have too many great ones. And when Dabo started his coaching, he and I spent about 4 days together, and he brought his entire staff out to Texas, and we sat down and talked. So there are a lot of similarities in the way we do things and the way Clemson does things. And it's really worked so well for him. I'm proud of him and proud of what they do.
Let's go back to Sam Howell's recruitment. You and your staff have had a ton of big recruiting wins since Howell flipped to y'all from FSU, but I think that was the tone-setting recruiting win for you guys in state, and then obviously the way you played this year. But when you got to Chapel Hill, when did you learn of Sam, and how did that recruitment play out from your point of view, and when did you know he was coming?
Well, Steve, it all happened so quickly because I'm a dear friend of Larry Fedora's and wanted Larry to still be here. And when that change was made, I was actually on the set of Who's In at ESPN. I just picked Oklahoma as one of the top 4 teams and made 27 million people mad in Texas. So I knew it wasn't good. But Bubba had called right after the show, and I called him back, and he said, we want you to be the coach at North Carolina. And I really had not followed recruiting that closely. And I've always had a staff in mind because that's just what you do as a coach. I didn't know if I'd coach again, but if I did, when I'd go do games on Friday night or I was watching games on Saturday, I'd look at assistant coaches and see what would work. And as soon as we took the job, which was the next day on Monday, we were here, had a press conference on Tuesday. Sam Howell was the guy. He was the player of the year in North Carolina. He was the quarterback. Larry had 2 good young quarterbacks here, and in Cade Fortin and Jace Reuter, but he was the guy. And we needed to start the in-state recruiting. We needed to make a point that was going to be really important to us, keep the best players at home. And he was key to doing that. As far as when it happened, Walt Bell left, and he was the guy who had recruited Sam at Florida State. He left to take the job at UMass, and that really helped us. Probably was the biggest difference for us. And then Sam and his parents kept saying, I need to see an offensive coordinator. I said, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a lot of the things Oklahoma's doing. I need to see an offensive coordinator. Get me a face. Get me a person. So when we hired Phil Longo, the first place he went was to see Sam. And then it was close to the early signing date. And thank goodness Sam decided to come on. And he's been able to be a great recruiter for us just with his presence and his leadership and what he was able to accomplish in his first year.
Did you feel like before you got Coach Longo, you didn't know what he was going to do? How quickly after Coach went in home there, did you feel good about him being part of your guys' rebuild?
I thought that Sam wanted to stay at home. I thought that he wanted to be at North Carolina. I just had to give him a reason to be. And quarterback, throw the ball. So he was going to wait and see. If I had brought in a wishbone guy from Army, then there'd be no Sam Howell. So when he saw what Phil had been able to do at Ole Miss, and Phil had actually contacted him, tried to recruit him at Ole Miss, then it was home free after that. He was very excited and obviously tremendous year.
You obviously had some great quarterbacks at Texas, Vince Young, Colt McCoy quickly come to mind. How does Sam Howell compare to them in the way that they were able to win for you at Texas in his future going forward with y'all?
I think he's very similar to them, Steve, in the fact that you've got to have a great player at that position to win. We all know that. You look at the final four teams every year, and they all have great quarterbacks, and they're all the ones in the draft. We're talking about Tua, and we're talking about Joe Burrow, and we're talking about Justin Herbert. And so those are just names that are thrown, and Trevor Lawrence would be if he could go into the draft right now, and Ohio State. I mean, those are the best quarterbacks in the country, and they're the ones that play at the end of the year. And Colt McCoy and Vince Young could just win. They led. They knew how to win. I think Colt was a 2-star coming out of high school. Maybe some people had him a 3-star. Everybody said Vince couldn't be a quarterback. He had to be a safety or receiver because his throwing motion wasn't right. And one of them won the national championship. Another one took us to the national championship. And we'd had a great chance to win if Colt hadn't gotten hurt that day in Pasadena. But that's what Sam does. Sam wins, and he leads. And he's one of the hardest workers on our team. He's academic all-ACC. He's got very strong faith. He's very, very unselfish, and he played hurt a lot of the year. So those are the attributes a young quarterback needs to be successful. Now, he's also very accurate, and he can run. We just couldn't run him last year because he had a sore knee and a sore ankle at some point. We didn't have a backup with any experience. So I think there's a real upside to Sam next year that he'll be making more plays with his feet as well.
Coach, your first tenure at North Carolina, you won just one game in both of the first 2 seasons before you got that thing rocking and rolling. You won 7 last year, which was 2 more games than the previous 2 North Carolina teams beforehand won combined. Going into the season, would you have thought you were going to finish closer to 1 win or 7 wins? What would you have said prior to kicking off there against the Gamecocks?
Things were so tough for them, and the previous 2 years they didn't win close games. They had so many injuries, and it was really, really hard for Larry at the end. So I really wasn't sure, Steve. I wasn't sure who we were, and I didn't know how we'd respond. I was shocked when we beat South Carolina late in the opener, very honestly. And then we come back and beat Miami the same way. Both were comebacks, and I was so surprised because that team had not been able to do that the previous couple of years. And then I was disappointed that we go and lose 2 games in a row and then have the tight game with Clemson. But the credit I'll give to these young people is they did everything we asked them to do. They never quit. They kept trying. They'd get down in some ball games and fight back through. I think in retrospect, I wish we had been able to develop more depth and played more guys, because at the end of the year, we were a good team. And I think it's because we got a little health back, and we also played more people. We weren't as tired at the end of games. But the future is really, really bright. Last year, we were recruiting on hope. I hope people come to the games. I hope we win some games. I hope we'll have some fun. And now the recruits and their parents see that we fill the stands, and the fans were passionate about coming. We were one of 7 teams to sell out every game. They know that we are going to win. They see the recruiting has got great momentum right now. So we went from selling hope to selling facts, and I think that's why we're recruiting so much better at this time.
Well, Hope allowed you to sign one of the best defensive line classes in the country in 2020. Where do you see that group making the biggest impact on your football team this coming year? And did any of these early enrollees look better than you had thought in the short time you got with them before this coronavirus?
KJ Binkley got to come in, and he went from 275 to 300 in a couple of months, and I was so excited about watching him this spring. But most of those guys were coming in the summer, so I think their impact for us will be we're just going to play them. We've got to have some depth, especially in that position. So when those guys get here, whenever it is, because we're all wondering when we'll get ready to start and be able to start. Whenever it is, we're just going to take them out there and turn them loose, and we'll have a lot of different packages. I've really been impressed with Jay Bateman and his ability to put guys in the proper position to make plays. So if it's such that it'd be hard for them to learn most of the defense, we'll put them in packages and play them. But we're planning on playing those young guys and just putting them out there and letting them go.
When you hired Coach Bateman, did you realize he was going to be as good as he was? I mean, obviously you hired him for a reason, but you've been around the game for such a long time. Just what impresses you about Coach Bateman?
Steve, I was lucky that Jeff Monken had me come up and speak to the Army team and staff after my last year at Texas. And so I stayed 3 days and watched them practice and got to know Jay a little bit. And then I called their bowl game with San Diego State, and I watched him shut down a great running back that was up for the Heisman. I think his name was Penny, or he's a tremendous player. And here's Army shutting him down. And then I sat there like all of us and watched Army hold Oklahoma to 21 points when they were running up down the field on everybody and took them into overtime on the road. So Jay is a guy that I had been watching and very, very impressed with. And then you take his ability and his knowledge of defenses, and you take that he coached at Elon. He has recruiting Charlotte in this state for like 15 years. It was a no-brainer for me. And I do think, as good as I thought he was, I think he's better than I thought he was. He's just done a tremendous job, and he did such a great job against Clemson that day and Kenan Stadium. And after that, we lost a lot of players that day. And we weren't good on defense for a while, but he just kept fighting it, kept being positive, and he's coached at Ball State, he's coached at Elon, he's coached at Army. I'd say, we don't have much experience back here. He said, "Hey, Coach, I've coached teams that didn't have experience before. Don't worry about it. We'll be fine." So he's upbeat, he's positive, he's a tenacious recruiter, and I really like him. I told him I think he's kind of a weird genius in some way with his defenses.
Coach, only a couple more. Give me an all-timer from your days on the recruiting trail. Maybe it was your hardest fought recruiting win, or your best in-home visit, or one you thought you had a chance to get, or didn't have a chance to get, and you ended up getting the young man that ended up being a great player for you.
Steve, probably the craziest one for me, and there have been a lot of them in 40-something years, is Bonnie Holiday. It's the #1 draft pick. I played a long time in the NFL, still a dear friend of mine. He's from a small town just outside of Columbia, South Carolina. A lot of us are recruiting him. Some people thought he'd be an offensive lineman. He ends up being a first-round pick in defensive line. So anybody who thought that was wrong, he would have been a great offensive lineman, but we're all looking for defensive linemen, so he fit that bill. But he came to visit. He went back home. We didn't hear him. I think we missed last visit. Here on Sunday, here on Monday. We didn't hear on Tuesday. So here we are the morning of signing date, and we all know they're talking to somebody. So if he's not talking to you, he's not coming. So I called his house that morning on signing day, and Mom answered. And I said, Mom, is Bonnie there? I'm afraid we've lost him. She said, no, Coach, he's already gone to school. And I said, well, Mom, where's he going to go to school? And she said, Steve, I don't know. He wouldn't tell me. And that's not true. Mom, you know where he's going to school. And she said, but he's going to make his announcement, I think, at 10 o'clock. And we'll all know then, Coach. How are you? Are you doing well? I said, yeah, I'm doing fine. So I hung up the phone and I said, guys, he's not coming here. I don't know where he's going. And then all of a sudden I get his scholarship through the fax machine. I couldn't even believe it. And then I called him and I said, what are you doing? You wouldn't even return my calls. You wouldn't talk to me. He said, Coach, I knew what I wanted to do. I just didn't want to bother you with it. I knew you were busy and just wanted to send you my scholarship. So that doesn't happen very often, but he breaks the mold, and a recruit telling somebody where they're going and not telling the school that he was going to first.
What does a coach do in that situation where maybe you have another kid in limbo also and you're tight on scholarships and you don't know if he's coming, you don't think he's coming, but he hasn't told you no? How do you hang in there in situations like that?
Usually you lose the next guy because it's so late. So I've always told our coaches, you'd rather be fifth. You want to be first or fifth. You don't want to be second, because if you're second, you lose him and another guy. And so that's why we try to be very honest with recruits. We try to be direct with the parents, the high school coaches, and just say, man, if you're not interested in us, tell us. Come on, let us off the hook, because we've got to get a really good player. Do our program a favor. If you're not coming, just let us know.
Coach, last thing. You recruited Dre Bly and you recruited Tommy Thigpen and several other guys in your facility that are on your staff. And Dre Bly's really got a great reputation as a great recruiter for his alma mater. And Tommy Thigpen's had a great reputation for a while on the trail. How cool is it to go from knowing them when they were teenagers, children, to now being, to have the careers that they had as players, to being grown men on your staff working for you now and recruiting for you?
Steve, it is so cool. We've got Dre Bly, we've got Tommy Thigpen, as you mentioned. We've got Corey Hollidays, charge of football operations, played with the Steelers. He played for us. We've got Rick Steinbacher, who was a great linebacker and captain for us. He's in charge of all of our facilities. We just hired Kevin Donnelly, who was a great offensive lineman that played for us in the early 90s. And he's in charge of our high school relations. And we've got Dwight Hollier that is in charge of the wellness of our players. So we've got a lot of guys. And, Steve, we constantly tell them it's a 40-year decision. It's not a 4-year decision. And we're actually living that out, because so many of those guys are around me every day. And it's such a joy for me. I'm living a dream to be able to recruit them and coach them and then work with them many years later.
Are you surprised any of them went the coaching route, knowing what you knew about them when they were teenagers and early 20s?
I am. And I've said up to them many times when they say, well, that player's not acting right. I said, oh my gosh, did you forget who you were? Man, you remember when you were late to my meeting? You remember when I ran you? You remember when I suspended you? So they laugh and they say, I got you, coach. I hear you. So it's, but that's one of the fun things about it. The experiences that we all had together, we can relive and do a better job helping these young people today.
That's Hall of Fame coach Mack Brown joining us on 24/7 Sports Social Distancing. Thank you so much, Coach, and good luck. And hopefully you're on a football field here soon.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me on. I'm very honored, and we really appreciate the job that you guys do.